On November 20th says, what do we have here, ladies and gentlemen? Well, it looks like a New Testament codex without Matthew 28, 8 through 20. Now, notice how big that is. 8 through 20. Not 28, but 8 through 20. Meaning no Matthew 28:19 baptismal formula. What you are looking at is derived from the Syriac Sinaiticus palimpsest, dated the early part of the 4th century CE. Interesting, huh? More to come. Textual criticism. I'm not finished. Let's keep going. The plot thickens. So you have a printed text here in Syriac. And it stops at the end of verse 7, and it says, Dist ad finem. Now, dist ad finem in Latin means the ending portion is missing. Well, that's not shocking. Anyone who knows anything about textual criticism knows that unless you have a completely fragmentary text that has been torn apart over the years, a text that holds together and yet only contained one book, where is the damage of time most likely to take place with a book like that? The beginning, and even more so, the end of the manuscript. Those are the exposed pages. And so anyone familiar with textual criticism knows that, well, for example, I'm working with P45, and P45 initially contained Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. But everything that we have today is from the interior portions of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. Nothing from the beginning, earlier chapters or later chapters of any of those books. We don't have Mark 1:1. That would be great to have because of the variant there. We don't have John 20:28. That would be great to have, or John 21 and the issues there. No. We have interior portions because those are going to be the pages in a book that are going to be the most protected. Now, if it was all bound together, we could have, in P45, we could have had Acts 1. Because if it was all bound together, that would have been part of the internal material. But if it's transmitted as a single volume, it's the earlier and later portions that are most likely to be damaged in just simply the handling of the text. And one of the most famous stories of textual criticism, its history, illustrates this, and that is, why did Erasmus have to back translate from the Latin in his initial first edition in the book of Revelation when he gets to the end? Well, because the commentary that he borrowed from a friend, a Latin commentary at that, the last few pages had fallen off that contained that particular portion of the book of Revelation. And so this is a common issue. The reality is that we don't have any manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew that is a complete manuscript. So in other words, it goes to the end of Matthew, says the end, moves on to Mark, that does not have Matthew 28:19 through 20. None. And so you'll notice that even here, Mr. Shields went to a translation. Now, translations are secondary sources. They're important secondary sources. Sometimes they can't help us if the variant involves an element of the Greek language that would not necessarily impact translation into whatever that language is. But especially whether the text existed in what was being translated. So did the Greek manuscript of Matthew that was used for the translation into Syriac or Coptic or Sahidic or Braharic or whatever, did it contain this entire text? For example, the pericope adulterae, John 7:53 through 8:11. Translations, early translations, are relevant at that point because they can at least tell you whether something was there or where it was given that we have so many manuscripts that have that particular story at different places, whether it's in Luke or other places in John or things like that. So translational evidence can be useful, but I strongly assert it can never overthrow, especially the united testimony of the original language manuscripts, which would be Greek. And the united testimony of the original language manuscripts is that Matthew 28:19 through 20 has always been a part of the Gospel of Matthew. It is pure speculation to try to dismiss that. And even when you have, for example, when we discussed the John 20:28 issue, even when you have a fragmentary manuscript, if all the other manuscripts you have that go back to the ancient period have the same thing, and one is fragmentary there is no reason, no practicing, unbiased textual critic would say, well, if it's fragmentary in one place, but it's consistent every place else, well, then we shouldn't have it. They're not going to go there. You would not be able to recreate any ancient text on that foundation. They're all going to go with what is consistently been transmitted down through the centuries through as many lines of textual transmission as possible. And the fact is, there is no textual critical reason to reject Matthew 28:19 through 20. There's all sorts of theological reasons if you're a Unitarian. But all you're doing at that point is proving that your theology actually isn't derived from the text. You're trying to enforce it on the text. And so the fact is that when you have manuscript evidence, not just simply a manuscript that ends many verses beforehand, as is here, Matthew 28:19 through 20 is a part of the original gospel, and we should not accept questions about it. We should certainly examine any evidence that is brought forward. But here's a painfully obvious example of someone who has a theological reason, and it results in a misuse of textual critical material.